So one of the things that my wife likes that I make for her and a lot of our friends do is artisan bread. Now, an artisan bread, the only difference between that and a regular loaf bread is just how it's crusted. The outside crust is a hard crust. When you get a loaf of bread, typically they're soft, but if you go get an artisan bread, they have this really nice brown crust on the outside of it. Now what we're going to do is a two-part bread. The first part is actually making the dough. Now this is a no knead dough, so we're not actually going to have to knead this at all. We're just going to mix it and then we're going to let it sit. Now another nice thing about this particular bread is you can let it sit for hours. Typically you're going to let it sit for at least 3 hours to proof. Proofing means gaining in size, so when that yeast activates with all the flour, proteins and such, it will actually expand probably to at least double its size. Now in a traditional bread you're going to use a lot of yeast because you're going to want it to rise in an hour or so, and then you're going to punch it down and actually make it rise again. Well, with this one we're only going to do really a single rise, and we're going to let it rise for probably about 3.5 hours, and then when we come back after it's risen, I'll show you how we use a Dutch oven to give you that artisan crust that you always want to have. So first thing you're going to need to have is flour. Now flour, you can get all sorts of types of flour. If you're gluten intolerant, you might want to look at some other recipes. This is all gluten-based flour that we're going to be using. I used to be gluten-free. Actually found out it was other reasons. I had some joint pain, and so look into what additives they're putting into flours. You might decide that you're not a gluten intolerant, unless you're celiac, of course, and you might be having problems with some of the additives that they put into the bread flours. But what we're going to do is a mixture today. We're going to use a standard wheat flour, and we're going to also use a bread flour. Now you could do this all with just a all-purpose flour. You don't have to use bread flour. Either one works for this artisan bread. It's different than a traditional bread. We're going to use yeast. Now you can have a dry active yeast, you can have all sorts of kinds of yeast that you can buy at the store. They all work about the same in this recipe, and it's very forgiving. Now all breads need some salt. That salt, you know, is the essence that actually brings out some good flavor in any foods. And even if you don't like to have much salt in your diet, you do want to have some salt in the bread as it's cooking. It just makes it work better and have a better flavor. Now I'm going to add some things you might not see on some of the other YouTube videos, and they do some similar things that I'm doing today, but I'm going to add rosemary, black pepper, and some garlic. Now I'm going to use a garlic powder. I actually have fresh rosemary, but you could use dried rosemary. And then I'm going to use a mortar and pestle and grind up some black pepper. So we'll get to it in just a second. Let me pause here to get some of the ingredients together, and then we'll start right back up. Okay, I think we've got stuff ready to start with. One of the first things we're going to do, so I'm going to show you about doing this rosemary. Now rosemary, if you've never seen it before, actually grows in sprigs. Over in Europe, actually they make entire shrubbery out of it, but it's a very floral kind of spicy scent to it. You probably had it in things, didn't even know it. A lot of times people are adding it to meats and stews. It's a very unique flavor, and all I'm doing is I'm taking the actually greenery off. We're not going to use the stick. You can just kind of take your thumb, finger, just come down it like this. It'll actually pull completely off. And then you're going to get enough of this depending on how much bread. Now we're actually making a double recipe today. We're going to be doing 2 loaves. If I was doing this as a single loaf, we'd cut all these in half. So like we're going with 6 cups of flour. Now with that, we'd actually be probably doing 3 cups if we were doing just a single loaf for the family. As far as yeast, typically 1/4 teaspoon of yeast is all you need. We're going to do a half. Again, we're doubling the recipe. About 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And then because we're doing this more as a savory kind of bread, again, you're going to start to do with your rosemary like you have here. Again, if you've never chopped or done stuff with this, you may want to think about buying some stuff that's pre-done. But if you know how to use your knife, you're basically doing a rocking motion like this. You're trying to dice this up as small as you can. You don't have to worry, some of that's going to just cook into the bread in pieces, but I typically try to have as many small pieces in the bread, so number one, it can diffuse throughout the entire loaf, and also so you don't get a big sprig of rosemary in your teeth when you're eating some of this bread. So right there, pretty much you can see how much you're getting. So again, if you're using dry, you're probably going to use a little bit more than what I'm using here. Fresh has quite a bit more scent and flavor to it, so you might use a little less. So I'm probably using a good 2 tablespoons chopped rosemary. Now the other thing I'm using is a mortar and pestle, and as you can see, we have here some of these small ones. One here, we're actually putting in black peppercorns into the center, and all we're going to do is crush these. Now yes, you could use just regular black pepper out of your grinder. You could actually use black pepper out of a bottle. Doesn't matter. I just happen to like the effort to grind it, and I also like the flavor it gives it when you're cracking brand new peppercorn. It's just a better flavor in my opinion. Anytime you can use an herb fresh, anytime you can use ingredients. Now some of the things that you put into stews and other things, I'd recommend putting them in a hot pan, heating them for a few minutes just so they release their oils. In this case, since it's going to be inside of bread and it's going to be baking for a while, you don't really have to do that, but it's a good workout. Works on the biceps. And again, you got black peppercorns, and we're going to put that in there as well. So to start this, move this around a little bit. My dog's going to probably try to come over and eat peppercorns. So here is the here's the pan we're going to use. Now you could use a bowl. Most people use a large bowl. We're not going to do that. We're just going to mix it in here to just show you how easy it is. Again, I did 2 of whole wheat, 4 of a regular bread flour. Just kind of mixing it together just to incorporate it a little bit, so you don't have just one glob of the whole wheat somewhere and you have the rest of the flour. With that, we're going to take our salt and our yeast, put it in like that. Again, dry ingredients mix first, and then we're going to mix in the wet, which is the hot water. About 1.5 tablespoons, 2 tablespoons, whatever your desire for garlic. Now remember, it's going to be quite garlicky if you put too much in. Some people like that, some people don't. So do it to taste. I happen to like garlic, and I'm going to do a lot. We're going to take the rosemary. Again, it's a dry ingredient. Put that in there. And we'll take the black peppercorns in there as well. So now we have all of our dry ingredients, mixing them, incorporating them, getting them all in there. And again, this is just to get the dry just set. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pour it into the pan. And then we're going to take 3 cups of very, very hot water. Now it's not hot enough to burn you, but it's hot enough to react with the yeast. And so what you do is you start to get it in there. You will stir this around. And again, it's not something that you have to be too precise about, because all it's going to do is we're going to use this to soak up all this liquid. Now again, you could do this in a bowl. You could do this however you like. I've seen people do them in Tupperware bins. I've seen them do it in other kind of containers. But all we're doing is we're mixing this together, trying to incorporate. Now again, if you're having your recipe, again, we would use only 1.5 cups of water. Now this isn't going to come together, if you've ever done regular bread, it's not going to come together like you have when you do a loaf of bread. A loaf of bread, you typically don't want it to be tacky at all. I used to do a lot of loaves of bread in the house. We pretty much have gone carb free for the most part, but every so often you get that hankering to have a little bit of bread or something, so I figured this would be something fun to do. So it's going to soak up all that flour, is soaking up all that liquid. And as you can see, it's not soupy, but it's got kind of threads. See how that kind of looks like you have shredded, like shredded dough. And what we're doing is we're just making sure we've incorporated everything in here. And at this point, all we've been doing is mixing. We have not been doing anything in the way of kneading the dough. And we're not going to knead the dough because it doesn't need to be kneaded. I know, silly, but it doesn't. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to kind of incorporate this together. I'm just throwing it on top of itself just to make sure I don't have any dry on the bottom, because you don't want to have leftover dough on the bottom unless, actually doesn't matter. But I'm just putting it in here. And again, really haven't done much in the way of kneading it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate this in half, because again, we made a double recipe, right? So we're going to have one ball sitting here, and we're going to have another loaf sitting here. Okay, 2 loaves. So I'm going to cover this. You can cover it with a towel, you can cover it with plastic, whatever you want to do. Love the hands. And then once it's been sitting here for about 3.5 hours, we'll come back and we'll go ahead and finish this up. Okay? So, again, we're doubling the recipe. Normally recipe would be 3 cups of flour. It could be all-purpose. It could be a mixture. It could be bread flour. 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. Again, we've doubled it for us, so we're doing a half. You got to remember your salt. Some people like to put olive oil in it. I don't. But you could put olive oil in it if you like to have a little bit of that olive oil flavor, but use really good extra virgin olive oil if you do. And then for me, we're making this to be a savory bread, so I used crushed black pepper, I used rosemary, we'll show you how to chop that up, and I also have used the garlic powder. Now I've tried this with garlic itself. It's a lot stronger, and garlic powder works a little bit easier for me, so that's what we've got. So when I come back, it's going to be about 3.5 hours from now. You should see that this bread has gotten larger, and we should be able to go ahead and use that Dutch oven and cook up some bread. So we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so it's been about 4 hours since we put the dough in to rest. We're going to now take it out, take a look at it, do some things with it at first, getting it ready to bake in the oven. So first thing we're going to do, I'll make sure I have all the proper utensils. So here is our dough. If you remember, we had a loose mix of it and we separated it in 2. You can see right now it has doubled in size. So that's really, really good. That's what we wanted to see. We're going to do 2 things with this. We're going to take and put a little bit of flour down on the counter. We clean the counter off. But this is just to make it so that when we put the dough down, it doesn't stick. We'll do this one at a time. So we'll take the first one out. And all we're going to do is take, and we're going to spread a little bit of flour on the top of it. And we're just going to kind of turn this thing over a couple times. We don't have to do much. And all we're doing is making sure it's not too sticky. Again, we're not having to knead this. It's pretty much all done. Okay, that's one of them. And then we're going to take the other one out. And again, I probably wouldn't normally do it in a pan this size, but just to make it easier for you to see, we did. A little bit of flour. Don't want to have too much. We're going to sit here and we're going to fold it in on itself a little bit just to make sure that we don't have it too wet. And once we've done this, again, we're making 2 complete loaves. So we have 2 loaves right here. Now the next thing you're going to need is a cast iron Dutch oven. Now the reason we're going with a Dutch oven it really makes a great crust. Now, we're making sure that we have a metal top with a metal handle. You don't want something that can melt in the oven. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start out, we're going to set our oven at 450 degrees. And with that, we're going to go ahead and put the Dutch oven in. And we're going to let that start to preheat. So you're going to have a very, very hot Dutch oven. So when we get to the point of putting the flour into the Dutch oven, you want to make sure you're using appropriate hand guards or pot holders or something, because it can burn you a lot. Now, while this one loaf is kind of resting, we're going to take the other loaf and we're going to actually cut it up. And the reason I'm doing this is my wife, Deb, she absolutely adores this bread, but we can't eat it all the time. So what we're going to do is I'm going to make tiny little ones, and I'm putting them over on some parchment paper, and we're basically making mini loaves of bread. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let them rest here for a little while, about the 30 minutes or so. Probably takes less than that for the oven to heat up. But about however long it takes the oven to heat up is how long these are going to proof. And the reason we're doing this is we want to have them rise just enough that if you wanted to bake them, you could bake them right away. What we're actually going to do with this is we're going to put them in a freezer just like this, and we're going to freeze the dough. So we'll have little tiny loaves anytime we want to make some bread, or better yet, you just want your house to smell good. So you stick in one of these small loaves, let it work with the bread, cooking. That smell of rosemary and garlic will permeate your house. And I don't care what anybody says, I think garlic, I think onions are lifeblood. It makes you feel better when you eat them. Like having ginger as well. And I do biscotti with ginger, a whole different thing. And we'll go into that when I start cooking biscotti. But for today, since we're talking about rosemary, we're doing garlic, we're doing cracked black pepper. And I'm just going to let this sit here, but I'm going to actually transfer this over to a piece of parchment paper. And the reason I'm doing that is because this parchment paper is actually going to be the home of this piece of bread until it's done. So I've got one loaf here, I've got mini loaves over here. At this point, all we're doing is we're waiting for it to heat up. So as soon as I see the temperature is up to 450, we will come back and we will show you how to bake this. It takes about 30 minutes to bake, and then we'll take the lid off and we'll do about another 10 to 15 minutes to get a golden crust on it, and then we'll be done, and I'll show you what it looks like when we cut it open. Now, a couple of important things. When you do regular baking with a loaf pan, you're doing an open bake. So that proofed flour, when you've got it all mixed as a dough, rises, you punch it down, it rises again, and then it kind of comes out of that loaf pan. Well, when you're baking it in a traditional oven, whether it's gas or electric, you're not getting any humidity on it. And in a true bakery, what they'll do is they add humidity to the ovens to give it that extra crust, to give it that extra texture that you want to have. Using the Dutch oven, the moisture within the dough actually self-steams itself during that 30-minute bake. And so that gives it that artisanal look when we get done with it. And then doing the last 15 minutes with the lid off allows that moisture to escape, and then it allows it to brown up quite well. So at this point, I'm going to leave you. I'll be back in about probably 15 minutes or so. You won't be able to tell time, but I will come back and we will go ahead and put this into the oven. Okay, been about 15 minutes or so, maybe 20. The oven is up to temperature at 450 degrees. Remember, we put that cast iron Dutch oven in there. We're going to use the right handwear to get it. And when I say handwear, I'm actually going to be using these oven gloves. These are things my girls got me I thought were fantastic. Use them for about everything. But they are a good way to protect your hands. But you could use an oven mitt. You could use towels, whatever. So I'm going to open this up. Now remember, this is screaming hot. So all I'm going to do is pick up my dough. Set it right in the Dutch oven. Close it up. Put it back in the oven. And I'm setting my timer for 30 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and let that bake. So it's going to bake for 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, we'll open it up. I'll take the lid off. I'll let it go about another 15 minutes and then I'll come back to show you the results after that. So be prepared. I know you can't smell this, but you'll be able to see it. Okay, so we're about ready to take the bread out of the oven. We'll see how it looks. Expecting it to have a nice golden texture to it. Remember, this is hot. Do not touch the hot stuff. So, this is what the bread looks like when it finally comes out. You can see it has a beautiful crust to it. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a bread knife. You always want to use a serrated bread knife when you're cutting bread. As you can see, hear that crunch? That's excellent. So we're going to cut a little bit in here. And normally I would let bread sit for a while so that steam can work its way through. Here's a nice piece of this. Wish you could smell this. It has a wonderful smell to it. Nice crust. I don't necessarily recommend people biting into hot bread coming out of the oven, but I've been known to do this quite often, so it doesn't seem to bother me yet. So again, let's go over what we did. We basically made a double recipe, but 3 cups of flour. You can add in wheat flour if you want. You can do regular flour. You can do bread flour. We did a combination. You use a 1/4 teaspoon of the yeast. We're going to use about a teaspoon of salt, maybe a little bit more. Depends on your like. And then, other than that, we added in garlic powder, fresh rosemary, and black pepper. So, I hope you have enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments below, and we'll keep cooking with you. Thanks for stopping by. Enjoyed it.